Welcome back to Let's Talk Dirty Radio. Mrs. Green, can you give everybody your social media handles, how they can stay in contact with MGM?
Well, you can go to my website, www.marquitagreen.com, MarquitaGreen, www.marquitagreen.com. I am also on Facebook and Instagram at Marquita Green Motivates.
All right, thank you for that. Can you share with the listeners your own daddy issues you experienced growing up and how you were able to overcome them?
I was one of those. Remember in the earlier segment, we talked about the spectrum of how some people have daddy issues because daddy literally abandoned, wasn't there, was never involved. Some people had daddy issues because daddy grew up in the home, but wasn't really present. Well, I was somewhere in between where my parents divorced when I was the young age of 2. And they did something which I thought was a little bit unique. They birthed 2 children, a son and a daughter, myself. And what they did at the point of divorce was decided that the male child will stay with the male and the female child would stay with the female. So I grew up with my mother. My brother grew up with my father. We grew up in 2 separate homes in 2 separate states. I was in Philadelphia. My dad was in Maryland. And they did an amazing job, I have to say, at keeping my brother and I connected. So what they did was every major holiday we spent together. Every spring break, my brother came to Philadelphia. Every summer, he spent the majority of the summer in Philadelphia. We always went on vacation with my dad. Like, there were very specific things that we had set. One of my most amazing memories was growing up with both of my parents on Christmas morning. What that would look like is on Christmas Eve, we would do our cookies for Santa and all the games and all the things and get ready for bed because, you know, you can't be awake when Santa comes, right? And so my brother and I would go to sleep. But when we would wake up on Christmas morning, whenever we got downstairs, my mom and my dad were both there. Amazing memories. And so somebody may be listening and saying, well, if you had this great thing, if your parents did this great thing and how they raised you all, where did the daddy issues come from? What tends to happen, because there is a spectrum, everything, you know the saying, everything that glitters ain't gold, right? And so even though I had an opportunity to have experiences with my father, there were still some things I lacked. Keep in mind, I shared that I grew up in Philadelphia. My dad lived in Maryland. And so he wasn't always there. He wasn't at every school function. He wasn't at every sporting event. Yes, he was at dance recitals, the culminating event in June every year. But he wasn't the one picking me up and taking me to ballet practice every Saturday. He wasn't the one taking me to Girl Scouts every Friday. Did he buy cookies? Yes, that I found out years later that he bought like hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of cookies every year so I could get my badge. I didn't know that growing up. And I may not, I probably was never supposed to find that out. But he did these incredible things, but they didn't take away from the things that I needed in the moment, right? It didn't take away the fact that when I was out selling those cookies, going from door to door, I didn't have my daddy walking me up and down the street. And so there were some pivotal things that I missed. He wasn't there to help me go shopping for my dresses for dances and proms. He wasn't there taking me to the hairdresser. He wasn't there for some of the things that seemed like the things that a girl would want. He didn't have those daddy-daughter talks with me to say, this is how a boy should treat you. I didn't have him in the home to show me how a husband treated his wife. I didn't have him around for some of these important conversations. Hey, I'm thinking about wanting to go to the movies with the boy. I wasn't calling my dad to have that conversation. And so there were many things that I naturally missed. Even though my father was in my life, he wasn't ever present in my life. In that same vein, there were some things about my father. He works a lot. He makes very good money. He lived in a good home. He was in a different class, economic, social class than the one in which I grew up. And so there were things that he did that I saw that were really good examples. And those examples is kind of what led me to certain things, like being an attorney. It led me to wanting to attend the University of Virginia because I wanted my father, who worked in metropolitan DC, to be able to have bragging rights too, just like his counterparts. There were some good things that he instilled, but what that did was it made me think that money became first above all things. It made me work, work, work more than living. Sometimes it has created barriers in terms of reminding me of some of the important things that matter and finding some balance in my life. It made me think that I always needed to strive for more. When he would have conversations with me, it was always about what's next. It was always about, did you look at this person and think about what this person is doing? And I rarely heard that he was proud of me in the moment that I was in. And so I never felt like the moment I was in was good enough. I always thought that I had to be thinking about the next thing. I always thought I had to be reaching for more. And so what that did was allow me to devalue the present moment. I never really lived in the moment because I was always reaching for next. Reaching for next is not bad. Don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have goals. I'm not saying we shouldn't have dreams and desires. I'm not saying we shouldn't have things to chase after, but we should not be so future focused that we miss the present moment. And that's some of what daddy issues did for me. The other thing it did is it impacted my ability to communicate with my husband, because I didn't know how to communicate with a man. I didn't have a daddy around showing me how to watch the football games and the basketball games and the whatever games. And so I wasn't really involved in those things. But how many of you know that if we're building relationships, then we have to connect with somebody from the opposite sex on levels of interest to them? And so if I didn't have somebody present those things to me, I didn't know how to operate in those realms. It impacted the way I communicated with my children. I always wanted more. I pushed. And I had to, after years, take a step back and say, wait a minute, let's not push so hard. Let's enjoy and embrace the season that they're in and encourage them where they are. And so there were a number of ways that it really impacted me that really started to destroy who I was. But really interpersonally, I never really felt like I was good enough. I really never felt like I was enough, because I always thought that I was supposed to be doing more, that there was more that was desired of me, that there was more that was expected of me. And so I never felt like what I did was enough. No matter how many A's I had, it wasn't enough if I had a B. It wasn't enough if I wasn't going to the right schools. It wasn't enough if I wasn't in the right job. It wasn't enough if I wasn't making the right amount of money. I never felt enough. And so I really had to come to grips with who I was and know that I was enough. And that's why writing that book that we were talking about became important, because I had to recognize that there were some very amazing things that I had done in my life, and I needed to embrace those things.
Now, y'all, now listen, she done said a whole lot, but what I'm going to focus on is the being enough. Far too many times when we're not nurtured properly, it allows us to, it makes us think that we're inadequate.
Exactly.
She said enough. I just want to hit whoever listens to this in the gut. It makes us feel inadequate. And when we feel inadequate, we find ways to make ourselves feel adequate. For men, that is, so I feel inadequate in one area, so I'm going to overcompensate in another. Whether that's, call it what it is, whether that's womanizing, whether that's drug use, whether that's illegal activity, whatever it is, it's those things. It's it's the feeling of inadequacy that creates the problem, the barrier for us to address the daddy issues that get us to a place where we look at the root cause and realize that we're enough, and figure out from that root that we're enough and how to heal. and
Right.
how to move forward, to have effective communication. Again, like I said, it starts with us. Now, I don't want to see and hear people out there talking to themselves and having full-fledged conversations, but communication is a sending and receiving of thoughts and information. So you have to speak it and get it
Mm-hmm.
from out of your head, to understand that it's real. You need to deal with it. And if you can't deal with it, like most of us can't, because a large majority, that's not what we were taught, to be able to look towards or for somebody to help us in that area to fill the inadequacies that we may be feeling. So I appreciate you for having that candid moment and sharing that, because again, going through the process, we feel that it's just us and that I don't have a voice, and what I have to say nobody's going to listen to. But if we don't say it, we don't know if what we're saying is going to affect a person. And it's not, we have to get away from the place of thinking we have to affect the masses. No, you have to affect one. It starts with one. When you can get to one and help that one realize, then you can begin to understand what it is that you have inside of you, what it is that God has given you, what it is that He's waiting for you to realize that you are enough, who you are to impact. All right, so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get into the book that you wrote. You are a published author, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you wrote a book with how many other women?
There were 7 of us in total.
And what's that name again? I was trying to think of what's not the name of the book. What's the process? What's it called?
Collaboration.
So it was a collaboration. And I tell you, from the male's perspective, from the husband's perspective, when she was asked, I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. Until she did some introspective work, and what she was going to put in the book are the things that we don't want to get out. Because if you're not healed, if you're not in a good place, you go back to the little boy that has no inadequacies, and you want to run and hide and not deal with what it is that you've had going on, you currently have going on, and that you haven't addressed, and that's preventing you from moving forward. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. The book's juicy. Now, I haven't read it. I have an idea of what it is that she discussed, but what I do know is there's something in the book called The Decision. Talk about the decision.
So the book is called Girl, Let's Get Over It Together. And again, it was a collaborative effort of the things that women endure, the things that we go through in life. Essentially, many women experience losses in various areas of their lives. And what happens is we suffer in silence. Oliver alluded to it earlier, and he said that sometimes we think that we're the only ones who have dealt with the thing. This book tells us that you're not the only one, sis. It says that no matter what type of loss, whether it was loss of a marriage, loss of self, loss of a mother or a loved one, loss of a relationship, there is something that we have lost. And there's ways that we can grieve those losses. And this book walks through 7 different journeys of losses. And in my specific chapter, I talk about loss of self. And in fact, my chapter is called A Breaking of the Soul and a Reconciliation of the Hearts. And what I do in this book is talk about the fact that there is a decision that we must make when we're looking for reconciliation, when we're looking to restore ourselves, when we're looking to reclaim our identity. And making a decision, we have to decide. So there comes a point in life where we have a choice, where we either stay where we are or we do something different. We can stay where we are and we can stay stuck, and we can allow daddy issues and mommy issues and all these things, this doubt, this insecurity, this fear, this shame, all these things to take over and to confuse our minds and control our lives. Or we can decide to do something different. We can decide that we want to shift some things, that we want to transform some things and soar into the person that we were called, created, designed, and destined to be. And so in this book, as we're thinking about this decision, I walk through 5 steps that are necessary in making a decision, 5 steps that are critical in saying, I want to move forward and shift some things in my life, that I'm ready to transform the way I'm thinking. I want to transform the way I'm feeling, and I want to move into something different. Now, I can't give you all 5 steps because at the end of the day, you've got to read the book and digest the material for yourselves. If I just gave you the 5 steps and you didn't understand how to walk through them, I'd be giving you an injustice. So I would encourage you to get a copy of the book. You can go over to my website, www.marquitagreen.com, and order your book. But what we talk about in the decision is that in order to change something, there's got to be these steps that you take. One of the most critical things that I think is important to talk about for today's purposes is step number 2, which is recognize that daddy issues are real. When you're going to make a decision to transform, when you're going to make a decision to change, you first have to identify that there may be something stopping you from moving forward. And in step number 2, recognizing that daddy issues are real, get you to get to the root of who you are. Keeping in mind that the things that we experience, the lack of communication, the self-doubt, the fear, the shame, all of that is rooted in something. And if we think about that we need to unplug some things, that we decide that we want to unplug, we recognize that those daddy issues hold us back from becoming. But what is at the root of all of that is our identity. And I want to take you to Genesis chapter 1. And so we're Gospel Talk Radio, right? So I got to take you to the word. In Genesis chapter 1, in verse 27, it says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Our identity is rooted in our creation. And when you understand that your identity is tied to your creator. One of the very first things that I said is that we as humans, we as children are created by a man and a woman, our mother and our father. And so naturally, we think in the natural sense of the word that our creation is based on our mommy and daddy. And so what mommy does or doesn't do, or what daddy does or doesn't do, impacts who we become. What I encourage people to think about in identifying that daddy issues are real, it goes beyond the natural sense. It goes beyond these horizontal relationships that we create here on earth. It goes beyond our marriages. It goes beyond our parenting. It goes beyond our workplace. Our daddy issues first start with our identity and recognizing that we have a divine connection. Our DNA is first rooted and based on our vertical connection with Christ. That is the establishment of our daddy issues. And so instead of focusing on daddy issues at the natural level, I encourage each and every person, anyone who is listening, anyone who reads, to take a step back and focus on the spiritual daddy issues, the daddy issues that are in that vertical connection. Because at the end of the day, whether your natural father ever comes back into your life, whether he ever meets your expectations, whether he ever gets it right, it doesn't matter, because your DNA is created And what I just read to you in Genesis 1:27 is that you were created in Christ's image. And that DNA right there is the DNA that can make all things whole. And so when we recognize who our creator is, when we recognize who our ultimate daddy is, it can break so many things off of our lives that we never even expected. And so instead of staying stuck emotionally on the natural level, let's get some time to press into God's presence and say, Daddy, who did you create me to be? Daddy, who did you design me to be? Why am I holding on to this guilt and shame? Why am I feeling abandoned and rejected? At the end of the day, you're not, because our Heavenly Father said that He will never leave you nor forsake you. And so no matter what happened naturally, Daddy said that He's always with you until the end of the world. Daddy said that I created you to be fearfully and wonderfully made. Daddy said that I created a plan and purpose for your life. When we understand that, then all of the things that happen here in the natural realm, we can begin to shift some things and break some things off. But that comes with the what? It starts with a decision. And that's why we've got to think about what it is that we want, and no longer make excuses for where we are, but say, I don't want to be stuck in this place. Instead, I want to do something different. I want to understand I want to know who I am. We don't lose our identity in marriage because we gave so much to our spouse. We don't lose our identity in parenting because we gave so much of ourselves to our children. We lose our identity because we disconnect from the Father. We lose our identity because we have daddy issues in the spiritual realm that impact all of our horizontal relationships. And so my encouragement in the book, my encouragement in the chapter and making a decision is to recognize that daddy issues are real, but it's not the daddy issues that we think. It's the daddy issues that come with our divine identity. And once we get that in full and correct alignment, then I think everything else will shape up in our favor.
All right, y'all. So I think she has solidified a return to the show. But real quick, step number 2 was what?
Recognize that daddy issues are real. They're not a figment of our imagination. It's not something that we made up. It's not something that somebody projected onto us. It is something that exists, but that we fail to recognize. Once we recognize that they are real, then we can make a decision to do something different about it.
So now listen, she dropped a gem before I said drop a gem. Daddy issues are real, and that's coming from a female. Men, I want you to understand that daddy issues are real, but it's a little bit deeper than the dad, the physical, male person that is, that had something to do with you being here. I want to thank you for just taking the time out of your busy schedule to jump on the interview on the radio show with me. I appreciate you for having the candid conversation with the listeners. I think that is one of the things, you and I, we've talked about it before, but I think that's one of the things that we miss. We don't have too many candid conversations about the things that have shaped, whether positive or negatively, that have shaped our lives. And I think if we do more of that, we will all be in a better place. All right, everybody. As I've said before, and I'll continue to say, deal with your daddy issues today. Otherwise, they will deal with you tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate you for taking the ride with me. Thank you for listening. And stay tuned. This will not be the last time that you hear Mrs. Green and MGM, Marquita Green Motivates again here on the show. Talk soon. Peace.